Can everyone see my screen?
Yep.
Okay, cool. So, hi guys, I'm Mikaila, and I thought that we could do just some basics of Illustrator. So, to start with, I just want to go over kind of what the difference is between Illustrator and like most other design tools, and then quick commands, and then I'm going to show you how to make an icon that you can export to an SVG. So the major thing about Illustrator, and I'm in Illustrator right now, is that it works instead of with raster images, it works with vectors. So like this image right here is comprised of pixels, and it's got, each of those pixels has a color that allows you to see it in mass together. You can manipulate those. But with Illustrator, everything exists as like a shape or a little object, and it has characteristics that you can manipulate aside from just color. So like this pig is composed of all of these shapes, and they have like a fill and a stroke, and this body is made up of points that can be manipulated to make it different shapes. And then they each have also a different z-index or like relationship to you front to back. And so whatever is new is closer to you. So that's like why you can see the eye above the body. And you can like move everything around. You can transform its position to make it like in front or behind it. So that's kind of like the main idea about Illustrator. So to get started, setting up your environment, like I just use the regular Workspace Essentials, which you can find in Window, Workspace Essentials. Has a nice set of toolbars that are really easy to navigate. And then the tools that I use pretty much most of the time are the selection tool, which we're in right now. And you can see what you're in based on like your cursor changes depending. So V just like moves stuff around. A is the tool that I use to manipulate the pig, and that like manipulates actual points on an object. M is a marquee tool, which helps you to make rectangles. So like this rectangle doesn't have any color to it. You can add color. And you can hold shift while you're building a rectangle to make a square. L is an oval. You'll draw that from the side. Again, if you want to make it a circle, you hold shift. If you want to build anything from the center and make it like the same, then you hold shift and alt at the same time. Backslash is line. So right now this line doesn't have any characteristics. We can give it a fill or a stroke to make it show up. And then pen tool is the tool that I use to draw the pig. And so that allows us to build a whole bunch of different anchor points which are connected into a line. T is for text, and we'll do that later. And then the major other things are just zooming in and out and copying in front and in back. So like to copy in back, I use often when I'm making like a little bug mock or a button mock-up. So I've got this rounded corner rectangle. I'm going to copy it and paste it behind, and then drag it down and change its color to be darker. And now we have like a little button mock-up. So I think the most useful thing to do is to learn by tracing. And so I'm gonna move this. So like right now I've got the Firehose icon, and it's like I think I stole it as like a PNG or a JPEG. And I'm just gonna clean it up a little bit. So what's nice about this is it's like a pretty complex image, but it's made up of some pretty simple shapes. So it's a really good like trial. And another great thing about Illustrator is similar to Photoshop, it uses layers to differentiate different, you can use it to differentiate different objects. So right now I've got the image, the background image on a base layer, and I drew some shapes on top of it. So I'm just going to finish drawing out the object using the pen tool that I talked about before. Make sure you're on the layer. And then just go ahead and find your corners, and then use the eyedropper tool or eye to select the right color. And again, one more shape, and then eyedrop it again. And so now we've got like all of the facets of the Firehose gem or the water droplet. So to save it as an SVG, we're going to open a new document. So Command N, paste in the gem, and you can see like my I'm using the anchor tool to line things up better. And then you're going to want to edit your document so that it hugs the icon like really closely, because when you put it into your front end, you don't want it to have a whole bunch of extra like padding around it, because you want it to just take up like the least amount of space that it needs. And then we're just going to go ahead and save as, and you can save right down here as an SVG. And I've got these presets saved in the slides, so you can refer to them later if you want to go ahead and look back at it. And save it, and now you have an SVG that you can pop right into your HTML, and it'll scale properly in your front end. And then the last thing that I want to talk about is just text. So text is the only kind of exception that we have to this whole everything's made up of points and lines. And so text actually is made up of text inside of a box that's made up of points and lines. This is important to know because if you build text with a box, you can manipulate the points around that without like editing the actual text itself. But if you build text by just hitting T and then starting to type, you end up losing all of the integrity around the actual font itself, and it turns it into this like half object, half text thing. So if you like the best thing to do is really just to type out your text, and then if you want to be able to export it as an SVG or like manipulate it as a series of points and lines, you expand it. So we'll copy our icon from before. I'm going to drag that over, and you've got the whole Firehose logo. Let's shrink that down. And I'm just going to object, expand, make sure these are selected, hit OK, and now this is a group of like points and lines. And you can now export this whole logo as an SVG. So that's it. Any questions?
Awesome. I have some questions.
Sure.
Because I hate Illustrator stuff, so because they always give you great Illustrator files for things you want to use for free, but no way of, like for me, I don't know how to use it. So how do you, is exporting to an SVG the only way to do it, or can you export into like a PNG or JPEG?
Yeah.
Something I can use right out the gate.
Yeah, and so actually that's a great question because I use that pretty often as well. So another thing you can do is actually easier because you don't even have to open up like a new file. You can just go ahead and create like a new, so actually what I would do is like group this whole thing together, and then instead of finding the bounding box around like this single object, it'll find the bounding box around this group. And then you can build a document by just clicking on it, and it basically like draws the very limit of the object. And sometimes I like to, so like if you're doing an icon and you do it this way, I scale it down like 98%. So that way I know that like the tips aren't getting cut off. And then you just press Command-Alt-Shift-S and it opens up Save for Web. And then you can switch between PNGs, JPEGs, and GIFs and have a bunch of different settings.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Is there a free version?
There is a
or a cheaper version, because I know like CS6 is still super expensive. You could probably find somebody with it that you could get your hands on. Creative Cloud is.
I have been.
I don't think it's that expensive. Yeah, that's how I got mine. I got mine through school, super cheap.
Yeah.
But Creative Cloud isn't too expensive, but to have a monthly membership will eventually get expensive.
Yeah, I haven't upgraded to the cloud version just like for that reason, because I don't want to have to keep upgrading. And it works just fine. There's like some quick commands that don't work, but otherwise it hasn't changed much as a tool in the last few versions. So
awesome.
Yeah.
So super interesting. So I have a question. How do you get good at sort of figuring out what shapes and like, because like I think it seems if I knew what shapes and what things to do, I feel like I'd be able to do it. But I think the hardest part of like drawing the pig is it's almost like code. I just wouldn't even know where to start. It's like, do a box, or so what tricks do you use to break down like an idea into like the shape components so you can know what to use the tool to do?
So actually, let me pull up like Chrome and let's see. So this is like one trick that I use to just like get better at drawing different things is I just go to Dribble and I like find random things that other people have made. And it's really interesting because like you definitely start thinking about like images as layers. So like if I know that this guy who I follow is like, I know he's doing these as like basic Illustrator objects, and then he's like going over them in Photoshop to kind of get like the textures. But you start to just see like, okay, this is like a curve with a straight line and it's got another thing. And so you can kind of start looking at it as like the different tones. So let's copy this image and we'll actually run and we just paste it in. And so like I can say like, okay, right here, he's got like a different skin tone than this one. But for the most part, like this is his head and he's like got this. And then you just kind of go around and it's generally just like picking out the colors that are the same for me. And then like knowing that that's going to be like one object versus another, or one shape versus another, right? And then like here where his nose is, you're probably going to want to draw the nose like a different shape that sits then on top of this like face object. But they're all like, it's just about how you then like make them relational to one another.
Fascinating.
So.
Wow, this is so cool. Like I've never looked at like other people's drawing and tried to understand it in layers. I'm sorry, my mind is just blown. Like looking at it that way and like the way you had the pick pulled out to all the different layers, I was like, oh, that makes so much more sense. Because once it's all put together, you're like, oh, yeah, that's a cool looking little flying pig. But I would have not thought about looking at it in layers. That's really cool to train yourself looking at like some simple logos or something on Dribble and then actually be like, how many layers do I see right now? Oh, 10.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and definitely like people, there's like I've been tricked, right? And like maybe that's not how that guy does it, but that's like how I would do it if I were going to go ahead and try and like recreate his technique. And then I would pull it into Photoshop and like maybe make it a little fancier. But,
awesome.
Yeah. And then I think what's cool is like if you get really good at it, you can start like building stuff like that in pure like CSS, right? Because then you're thinking about objects as like the way that they sit on top of one another, and then you don't even need to like use a different program. So.
I don't believe it. I want to see it done. Live demo.
Okay.
Awesome. Well, anybody else have any questions?
Yeah, I had one quick. What are some things that like Illustrator really shines for, like on the front end? Because I know like InDesign is more like for print. Photoshop's obviously more for like creating GIFs and photo editing. But
yeah, so like I got into Illustrator because I would use it to. So I would use it. This is when Illustrator became like my best friend. I was in architecture school and I would export drawings from Rhino, and Rhino would export items from different layers as like the same color. So if you had like 70 layers and that could have like thousands of lines on it, you could have, so he asked, what does Illustrator really shine for? Like, what do you really want to use it? And then he said, InDesign is really good for like print, and Photoshop is really good for like individual images. And so there's a tool inside of Illustrator called Select Same As, and you can select all of the objects that have like the same fill color or the same stroke. And so when you have like just a ton of objects that are all like out of order, you can select them based on the same stroke color and then apply them to the same layer and then hide that and move on to like the next thing. So when things are kind of like in total disarray and there's a lot of them, it's actually really good about like treating objects with characteristics.